Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another plunge. This time we're heading into, well, let's call it a slightly different kind of archive, one that might raise a few eyebrows.
Think less Indiana Jones, more inner space exploration.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, welcome to the occult archives, where we're not digging up literal relics, but ideas, concepts, even whole systems of thought that have, for whatever reason, picked up a sort of a certain mystique, a reputation, sometimes even a touch of, well, fear.
Episode 116, for those keeping track. And let me tell you, this one fits the bill. We're not cracking open some grimoire with creepy incantations this time.
No summoning rituals today.
But hold on, because the book we're looking at, P.D. Ouspensky's The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution, this could shake things up more than a few stooky spells, I'll tell you that.
It's a feared book, but not in the way you might expect. No monsters jumping out, no curses.
The fear here is more like confronting something that makes you rethink, well, yourself, your whole understanding of what it means to be human, and maybe the potential we're all walking around with completely untapped.
That's a big claim.
It is, and Ouspensky makes a lot of them. He's basically saying, look, forget the self-help aisle. We need to go deeper. This is about conscious transformation, a whole different level of self-work, operating on a system he calls the fourth way.
So, listeners, buckle up. This deep dive is a head trip, guaranteed.
Yeah.
Ouspensky doesn't hold back. He's got some radical ideas about what psychology actually is, what human nature really means, and, yeah, what we might all be capable of if we dare to even look there.
And he starts by taking aim at, well, psychology itself, or at least how it existed back in his day.
Didn't mince words, did he?
Not at all. He basically said modern psychology was, stuck, lost its way, like it had forgotten something essential about its own origins.
Which is ironic, considering there were tons of new psychological theories popping up all the time back then.
Right. It was booming. But for Ouspensky, all this new stuff was missing the point. He's saying, look, it's not enough to just analyze how people think and behave now. That's just scratching the surface. True psychology, he argues, should be about understanding our potential for growth. How we can actually change, fundamentally.
So he's arguing for a psychology of what we could be, not just what we are.
Exactly. And to grasp that potential, he says we need to trace psychology back, way back to its roots. And that's where things get really interesting. He claims that psychology, in its purest form, is ancient. One of the oldest sciences, maybe even the oldest.
But if it's so old, how come we haven't heard about it before?
Because, he says, for most of history, it was disguised. Hiding in plain sight.
Undercover psychology. This I gotta hear. What kind of disguises are we talking about?
Well, for a long time, it went by the name of philosophy. Think about it. A lot of the big philosophical questions, what is the good life? How do we know what's true? What's the nature of the self? Those are all basically psychological inquiries.
Right. It's all about how our minds work, how we perceive the world, what drives us.
Exactly. And Ouspensky points out that a lot of ancient philosophical schools, especially in the East, were basically psychological systems in disguise. Like, he says, look at the different branches of yoga in India. It's not just about stretching and breathing. It's a whole system of understanding the mind and how to control it.
So they were doing psychology, they just called it something else.
Right. And the same goes for Sufi teachings, with their emphasis on introspection, purification, and direct experience of the divine. That's all psychological work, too. Even in the West, for centuries, what we now call psychology was often lumped in with philosophy.
So psychology was like the secret ingredient in the philosophical stew, so to speak.
Exactly. But the disguises don't stop there. Ouspensky also sees a strong link between psychology and religion. Not that they're the same thing, but he's saying that almost every major religion, the ones that really go deep, they all develop their own psychological teachings, often woven into their practices.
A hidden psychology within religion. Can you give an example?
Sure. He mentions the Philokalia in early Christianity. It's basically a collection of writings by these early Christian mystics, used mainly by monks for training. And within those texts, you find some really profound insights into the human psyche, into the workings of the mind and emotions.
So these monks were doing some serious inner work, and they documented it.
Exactly. But then, switching gears completely, Ouspensky also points out how psychology found expression in art, too.
Art, like paintings and sculptures and stuff.
Yep. He's saying that poetry, drama, music, even architecture, they can all transmit psychological knowledge and insights, sometimes even more effectively than words alone.
Wow, that's an interesting thought. Like the architecture of a Gothic cathedral could be expressing psychological ideas.
Precisely. And going even further back, before philosophy, religion, and art took the forms we know today, Ouspensky says that psychology existed within the ancient mystery schools of Egypt and Greece. Later, as those traditions faded, this knowledge got passed down in more symbolic forms, like astrology, alchemy, and even more recent movements like Freemasonry and theosophy.
So it's like this hidden thread running through all these different fields, all these different times and places.
Exactly. But here's where Ouspensky makes a crucial distinction. He says that all these psychological systems, past and present, overt and hidden, they all fall into two basic categories.
Two categories. Okay, lay it on me.
The first category, he says, studies man as he is, or at least as we think he is. This includes most of modern psychology, the kind that focuses on analyzing behavior, measuring personality traits, and so on.
So the psychology of the status quo, of the here and now.
Right. But then there's the second category, and this is where Ouspensky is really interested. This category looks at man not from where he is, but from where he could go. It's about understanding human potential, the possibility of evolution, of becoming something more than we are now.
So the psychology of what's possible, not just what is.
Precisely. And he argues that these are the oldest systems, the ones that hold the real key to understanding what psychology is truly about.
And from this perspective, how does he actually define psychology?
For Ouspensky, true psychology is the study of the principles, laws, and facts of man's possible evolution. That's the lens he's looking through in these lectures, and it changes everything.
Okay, so the idea of evolution is central here. But Ouspensky had some, shall we say, disagreements with the standard Darwinian view of how humans got here, right?
Big time. He basically dismissed the conventional understanding of human origins, flat out denied that we evolved purely mechanically through heredity and natural selection without any conscious effort on our part.
He even hints that humans in the past, like way back in the past, might have been more advanced than we are now. That's a bold claim.
It is. He's suggesting that, maybe ancient monuments and historical records point to a time when humans were operating on a higher level, a level that we've somehow lost. And as for those prehistoric human-like creatures we keep finding fossils of, he even entertains the idea that they were totally different beings, completely separate from our lineage.
So if we haven't been mechanically evolving all this time, what does that mean for the future?
He's saying there's no guarantee of future mechanical evolution either, meaning we're not just going to passively evolve into something better just by sitting around waiting for it to happen.
So we can't just coast on the accomplishments of our ancestors.
Nope. He argues that humanity, as we are now, we're not the finished product. Nature only gets us so far. Then it's up to us to choose. Do we stay stuck, or do we make a conscious effort to evolve further?
So this evolution he's talking about, it's not some automatic process. It requires work.
A lot of work. It means developing inner qualities and abilities that usually lie dormant within us. And this development, he insists, can only happen under specific conditions, with deliberate effort and with guidance from those who have already walked the path.
So it's like a journey, a transformation that we have to actively undertake.
Exactly. And the first step, he says, is to realize that we're not even starting from where we think we are. He's saying we have all these assumptions about ourselves, about our abilities and capacities, which are just flat out wrong. We think we're in control, we think we know ourselves, but in reality, we're much more limited than we realize.
So step one is getting a dose of reality, a good, hard look in the mirror.
Right. And one of the biggest illusions we have, he says, is that we're these single, unified beings. We feel like this ego is running the show. But he's saying that's not how it works at all.
Okay, so if we're not this unified self that we think we are, then who are we?
He's saying we're actually made up of multiple I's, different parts of ourselves that are constantly shifting and changing depending on the situation.
So it's like we have all these different personalities inside us, and they take turns being in charge.
Sort of, but it's even more fragmented than that. He's saying that we're not even aware of most of these I's most of the time. They're operating below the level of our conscious awareness.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept. So if we're not in control as much as we think we are, if we're actually this collection of different I's, then what does personal development even mean?
Well, for Ouspensky, it starts with understanding this fundamental truth about ourselves. And then it means working to develop a higher level of consciousness so that we can become more aware of these different parts of ourselves and start to gain some control over them.
And he doesn't mean just being smarter or more knowledgeable, right?
No, he's talking about a different kind of consciousness altogether. He makes a clear distinction between consciousness and mere intellectual activity, the kind of thinking and analyzing that our minds are always doing.
So consciousness isn't just about being able to think.
No, he says consciousness is about awareness. It's about being present in the moment, being aware of yourself, your surroundings, your thoughts and feelings, and the forces acting upon you.
And he emphasizes that most of us are not truly conscious most of the time.
Right. He says we spend the majority of our lives in a state of waking sleep, where we're going through the motions, reacting to things, but not really present. We might have fleeting moments of genuine consciousness, but they're rare and we quickly forget them.
So he's basically saying we're sleepwalking through life.
Pretty much. And he outlines 4 distinct states of consciousness that we can potentially experience: sleep, waking sleep, self-consciousness, and objective consciousness.
4 states.
Yeah.
Okay, let's break those down. We all know what sleep is, but what's waking sleep?
That's basically our ordinary, everyday state. We're awake, we're interacting with the world, but we're not really present. We're running on autopilot, driven by habits, impulses, and external influences.
So it's like being half awake, half asleep.
Exactly. And he says that in this state, we're still very much influenced by our dreams, just not the kind we have when we're literally sleeping.
Our waking dreams. What does that even mean?
He's saying that our thoughts, emotions, and actions are often shaped by unconscious desires, fears, and fantasies that we're not even aware of. These waking dreams can be just as powerful as our nighttime dreams, if not more so, because we're acting them out in the real world.
And he explicitly distances himself from the whole subconscious mind thing that was popular back then, right?
He did. He thought those terms were misleading and argued that there's nothing permanently subconscious because nothing's permanently conscious either, not in the way we usually think of it. We're constantly shifting between these different states.
So it's all about becoming more aware of these shifts, these fluctuations in our consciousness.
Exactly. And the next 2 states, self-consciousness and objective consciousness, those are about reaching a much higher level of awareness. Self-consciousness is when you become truly objective toward yourself. It's rare and fleeting for most of us, but it can happen in moments of crisis, intense emotion, or sudden shock.
Like those moments when you suddenly see yourself from the outside, almost as if you were another person watching yourself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And objective consciousness is even rarer. It's about perceiving reality directly, without the filters of our senses and subjective interpretations.
So it's like seeing the world as it truly is, unfiltered.
Precisely. And he says that our ability to perceive truth depends on our state of consciousness. In sleep, we can't access truth at all. In waking sleep, we're limited to relative truths, things that are true from our limited perspective. But in self-consciousness, we can perceive the truth about ourselves. And in objective consciousness, we can perceive the truth about everything.
That sounds like a pretty lofty goal. How do we even begin to move towards these higher states of consciousness?
He emphasizes that it doesn't happen automatically. It takes effort, deliberate practice, and the right kind of guidance.
So not something you can just figure out on your own.
Not really. He believed that certain methods and techniques were necessary, and these could only be properly transmitted through a school, a group of people working together under the guidance of a teacher.
So he's talking about a very specific kind of learning environment, not just reading books or attending lectures.
Right. He's talking about a school in the traditional sense, where students are engaged in practical work, not just theoretical study.
And these lectures themselves, he clarifies that they're not a school, right?
Definitely not. He says these are just an introduction, maybe a preparation for the real work.
And he highlights a couple of major obstacles that we all face on this path to higher consciousness, right?
Yeah, he talks about the role of lying in imagination.
Lying, as in telling falsehoods.
It's more than just that. He's talking about a kind of internal lying, where we pretend to know things that we don't, or we deceive ourselves about our own motivations and intentions.
So it's like self-deception.
Exactly. And he says this is something we all do all the time without even realizing it.
And imagination. That seems like a positive thing, creativity and all that.
Well, he sees it differently. He views imagination as mostly destructive, a way of escaping from reality and indulging in fantasies that ultimately keep us stuck.
So for him, imagination is actually a form of lying, a way of avoiding facing the truth.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And he introduces another key concept that's crucial for understanding all of this: the difference between essence and personality.
Essence and personality. I think I've heard those terms before, but what do they mean in this context?
Essence is what we're born with, our inherent nature. It's the raw material, the potential that we have within us. Personality, on the other hand, is everything we acquire throughout our lives, all the beliefs, attitudes, habits, and roles that we take on.
So essence is like the seed, and personality is the plant that grows from it.
That's a good analogy. And the ideal situation, he says, is for essence to dominate personality. Meaning, we should use our acquired knowledge and skills to express our true nature, our unique potential.
But it's often not what happens, right?
Unfortunately not. In most people, personality takes over, and we end up living a life that's not really in alignment with our true selves. We become identified with our roles, our beliefs, our possessions, and we lose sight of who we really are.
So the goal is to reclaim our essence, to let our true nature shine through.
Exactly. And he says that one of the main ways to do this is to work with the four centers.
The four centers, that's another one of his key concepts, right?
Yes. He's saying that we don't have one mind, but four. The intellectual center, the emotional center, the moving center, and the instinctive center.
4 minds in one head. That sounds complicated.
It is, but basically each center has its own function, its own way of processing information and responding to the world.
So like the intellectual centers for thinking, the emotional centers for feeling, and so on.
Sort of, but it's more nuanced than that. Each center has its own strengths and weaknesses, its own way of perceiving reality. And he says that most of us are not using our centers effectively. We're letting our personalities run the show, and that means our centers are often working against each other, creating conflict and confusion.
So part of the work is to learn how to use our centers more harmoniously.
Precisely. And he goes into great detail about the structure and function of each center and how we can work with them to develop ourselves.
And he emphasizes that this work isn't just about individual effort, right? It requires certain external conditions as well.
Absolutely. He says that true development can only happen in the right kind of environment with the right kind of support.
So it's not just about willpower and self-discipline.
No, he says it's more than that. We need a conducive environment, a supportive community, and the right kind of guidance. He even cites ancient texts like the Laws of Manu, which talk about the importance of having a stable society and a just ruler in order for spiritual development to flourish.
So he's saying that our personal growth is actually dependent on the larger social and political context.
Exactly. And he talks about two different types of influences that are constantly acting upon us. Influence A and influence B.
Influence A and influence B. What are those?
Influence A is everything that comes from our ordinary life, our daily concerns, our desires for pleasure, security, comfort, and so on. It's the influence of the world, of society, of our upbringing. Influence B, on the other hand, comes from a higher source. It's the influence of ideas, teachings, and practices that aim to awaken us to our true potential.
So influence A is kind of like the default setting, the path of least resistance, while influence B is the call to adventure, the path of transformation.
That's a good way to put it. And he says that most of us are primarily under the influence of A, which is why we're stuck in this state of waking sleep.
So we need to expose ourselves to influence B in order to wake up.
Exactly. And he says that one way to do this is to develop what he calls a magnetic center.
A magnetic center. What's
It's
that?
like an inner compass that points us towards the truth, towards those things that can help us evolve. It's formed by the accumulation of impressions from influence B, and it helps us to recognize and connect with those teachings and practices that can truly help us grow.
So it's like an inner guidance system that helps us find our way.
Exactly. And once we've found the right path, the right school or teacher, then the real work can begin.
And he outlines 3 main lines of work that are necessary for this kind of development, right?
Yes, he talks about self-study, work with others, and work for the school.
So it's not just about learning the theory, it's about putting it into practice in a group setting.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that all 3 lines of work have to be done simultaneously.
And he mentions the importance of rules in a school setting, even highlighting a specific rule about acknowledging the source of the teachings.
Yeah, he says that rules are essential for creating the right kind of environment for growth. They help to foster discipline, self-awareness, and respect for the tradition. And the rule about citing sources, that's about acknowledging that the teachings don't belong to us. They're part of a larger lineage that we're participating in.
It's about humility,
Yeah,
about recognizing that we're not the originators of these ideas, we're just the recipients.
precisely. And then he talks about the importance of understanding how our memory works. because that plays a huge role in our ability to learn and grow.
Memory. How does that fit into all of this?
He says that each center has its own kind of memory, its own way of recording and storing impressions.
Impressions,
Yep.
like sensory impressions.
It's more than just that. It's any kind of experience, any interaction we have with the world that leaves a trace in our centers.
So it's like our centers are constantly recording everything that happens to us.
Yeah, kind of like a camera that's always running. And he says that the way we remember things depends on our state of consciousness.
Meaning.
If we're in a state of waking sleep, most of these impressions just pass through us without really registering. We don't remember them, or we only remember them vaguely. But if we're in a state of self-consciousness, those impressions are recorded much more clearly and vividly.
So the more conscious we are, the better we remember things.
Exactly. And he goes into even more detail about the four centers, dividing each one into three parts: the mechanical part, the emotional part, and the intellectual part.
3 parts. This is getting pretty complex.
It is, but it's important to understand how our centers work if we want to develop ourselves. The mechanical part of a center is the most basic. It's just reacting to stimuli. The emotional part is more complex. It involves our feelings and desires. And the intellectual part is the highest. It's where we can access true understanding and insight.
So it's like a hierarchy within each center.
Right. And he says that most of us are operating primarily from the mechanical and emotional parts of our centers, which is why we're so often stuck in reactive patterns and emotional turmoil.
So the goal is to learn to operate from the intellectual part of each center.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of work. It means learning to observe ourselves, to identify our habitual patterns, and to develop the will to change them.
And he stresses that this work isn't just about gaining knowledge. It's about transforming our very being.
Absolutely. He says that knowledge without being is useless. It's like having a map but never leaving the house. We need to actually embark on the journey to put the knowledge into practice and allow it to change us from the inside out.
So it's about becoming a different kind of person, evolving into a higher state of being.
Exactly. And he ends by reminding us that this is a long and difficult path, but it's ultimately the most worthwhile journey we can undertake.
So listeners, as you reflect on these ideas from P.D. Ouspensky's The Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution, we invite you to consider your own level of consciousness, your own assumptions about yourself and the world. Are you living in a state of waking sleep? Are you letting your personality dominate your essence? Are you ready to embark on the journey of conscious evolution? These are not easy questions, but they're worth asking. And if you're willing to do the work, who knows what you might discover?
It's a deep dive, for sure, and we've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully this has given you a taste of the kind of radical self-exploration that Ouspensky was all about. And if you're intrigued, we encourage you to seek out his work and dive deeper for yourself. Who knows, you might just find something that changes everything.
Until next time, deep divers, keep exploring
Keep questioning.
and keep evolving.
See you in the archives.